Welcome to everyone joining from Ontario, from across Canada and across the world. My name is Matthew Lynch from the Centre for Building Sustainable Value at the Ivey Business School, one of the co-hosts of today's event. And on behalf of Carolinian Canada, the other co-host, and the rest of the leadership group that you'll meet soon, welcome. This is a very exciting moment, an opportunity for the first major public event profiling the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond. A really exciting piece of local innovation, but with global potential. The occasion today is the launch of a new research report, a very detailed report looking at the bond, presenting the model and an evaluation of its impact so far. And also a StoryMap, an online tool, which really gets underneath and really tells the story of the bond in a beautiful visual way. Both of those links are in the chat if you want to sort of engage with those while we're presenting today. I want to start the session by framing it in terms of we've just had two major global meetings in the last couple of months. The start of COP15 for the conservation biodiversity conference, and also obviously the recent climate COP in Glasgow that's just finished. And what those two events have told us is we really are facing some major challenges in climate and biodiversity, and of course those challenges are interconnected. And while there's progress being made, it's not happening fast enough. And it really is putting, I think, increased focus on the need for local innovation and action. The other thing that those events have demonstrated to us is the importance of finance and getting capital and finance flowing to innovation and to this local action. But in many areas, and biodiversity is one in particular, we don't really have many proven means of getting capital flowing. And that's one of the exciting things about the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond that you're going to hear about today. It's about that local innovation that's scalable and also is really innovating to bring capital flows to help invest in nature. So the way we're going to structure today, there's first a series of sort of short, fairly rapid fire presentations from the leadership group that's going to present the bond. And we're going to focus on a couple of key dimensions: innovation, collaboration, and impact. We're then going to take a step back and have a panel discussion that we're going to reflect on the sort of broader significance of what we've heard through the presentation, and linking to some key major agendas: reconciliation, climate, and conservation. And at the end, stay tuned, we have an exciting announcement about phase 2 of the bond and its scaling up here in Canada. So before we get into the detail, there's, I think, something really important that we need to focus on, and that is the need for Indigenous leadership whenever we're talking about conservation. And that obviously starts by recognizing the traditional owners of the land that we're engaging with. And in our project here that we're going to be talking about today, that's recognizing the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Wendat, and the Mississauga peoples, the nations, and many others who are the traditional owners of this land. But I think more than that, what we're trying to do is to really bring that leadership to the fore in a conservation conversation, opening ethical space for that dialogue, and really leveraging the incredible knowledge that Indigenous peoples have on natural systems and the interconnections between them. So to start the call, I'm going to call on Leslie White-Eye, one of our respected Indigenous leaders here in Ontario. Leslie is the former chief of the Chippewa of the Thames, First Nation, who are one of the key partners in the bond. She also has multiple leadership roles. She's on the board of King's College at Western University, also part of the SHARE initiative. So I'm going to pass to Leslie to make some initial remarks on the launch of the bond.
Hi everyone. Thanks again for joining us on this important initiative happening here in my home community of Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. We call our home DZCIB, and as you know, this project is named after our way of calling our community, and what it means is Antler River. But I didn't always know that. I'm a member here. Both my parents are from here. Both my grandparents are from this territory, this land, and lots has changed in the time when I was small and the time now that I'm raising my children here. A big inspiration for me has always been, once I had my children, I wanted very much for them to understand who they were. I wanted them to know who they were as Anishinaabe Ojibwe. And particularly for my two daughters, I wanted them to know and understand their role as water protectors. And part of that learning and the majority of what we've come to know about our work as women, as young women working with water, has come through the Three Fires Medewan Lodge. And I've been going, for a long, long time, well over 25 years now, and trying to understand and have an appreciation of what it means to be a water protector. That influence, and along with the work happening in the Chippewa, the Thames, in relation to water protection, but also assertion over traditional territories, that too has sent me in a direction around the importance of water and what that engagement with water means for us today. Water is sacred in our teachings. When my daughter had her first moon time, she was ready, she understood, she grew up in the lodge, she saw all her sisters doing the work in the lodge and taking that rite of passage of a strawberry fast. In all of those teachings, as she saw some of her older sisters take that on, she recognized and could see the importance of, reconnecting to place that way. And I didn't have to invite her. She knew exactly what to do when that time came. And she knew why she was doing it, and she knew the role she had as a young woman emerging, that she has an obligation to this particularly important life-giving force of water, but also to the plant strawberry. And so her ability to go out and harvest those berries for a year right here at Chippewas of the Thames in different places in the community, that's important for her to do her work when that time came. And it's that kind of reconnecting to place that I am so desperately trying to want to reestablish for my family and bring that understanding. And so when initiatives like this happened, where other people outside of the community also want to see these natural spaces protected, but also preserved in a way that all of creation that would be there can survive and thrive, that's a pretty special place to be. So I'm always going to be an advocate and a big champion of partners coming together like this project has done, to talk about this place, this very special place that we call home here at DZCIB, and that we will continue to call home. We're not going anywhere. We don't plan to go anywhere. This will be our home, and so therefore we'll want ourselves to be better at the protection side, but also want our partners and our neighbors to be better at that as well, because we all share the same watershed. So with that, I just really am excited to have been invited early on in this project to share some of the things we've learned about water, but also the teachings behind it, the values and the principles that I was able to share with some of you who attended a number of workshops over the year around the importance of water and the teachings behind that and that reconnection to place. So just a shout out to all of you for attending and wanting to learn more. But here's the project, and you're about to hear and get a sense of the impacts of that project in this first phase. So I'm really happy to be part of a small part, not a large part, but a small part in being part of this group. So with that, welcome. Be excited. Lots of different sectors coming together under this project, and that's really important, because all this work in climate change and biodiversity protection, and you know, it is going to be all hands on deck. It's going to require a whole integrated approach, and here's a project that has started to do that. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the next little while together, and you've got some great panelists on the way. Miigwech.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leslie. Some beautiful and profound words. So we're now going to start on the presentation component. As I said at the start, this is focusing on a lot of the content that's in the research report that you have the link to. And we're going to sort of focus on the highlights as we move through the presentation today. The first section we're going to focus on is the innovation component of the bond, both the overall model and the underlying conservation finance mechanism that sits underneath and brings the bond together. To do this, we have two people, Michelle Cantor, our co-host and the Executive Director of Carolinian Canada, and Diane-Laure Argely, my colleague at Ivey. So with that, I'll pass to Michelle.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Leslie, for that inspiring opening. So on behalf of Carolinian Canada, I welcome everyone listening to celebrate this milestone. We're really grateful to be part of this leadership team. And this team is 5 different sectors who are exploring how to innovate at home. And each sector has their own story, and you'll get a taste of those stories today. So I'm going to speak to the Carolinian Canada story. And for us, it starts with a big challenge. The Carolinian Zone ecoregion has the lowest levels of habitat in Canada due to colonization. Research shows we need to double our habitat to protect our wildlife, and that in fact we likely need to triple our habitat for climate resiliency. This is not a small task. Since we began our work in 1984, this ecoregion has had many wins for biodiversity, including policy, awareness, and hundreds of successful habitat programs. But it's not enough. We're still losing species and habitat. This is affecting the environment for 25% of Canadians. This is a microcosm of what's happening globally, and it could be a story of despair. Next slide, please. But we pause to listen and learn from many diverse stakeholders. A recipe for healthy landscapes emerged from hundreds of recovery plans and goals, and now we're creating a new story together, starting new conversations, centering Indigenous leadership, honoring all types of habitat, including everyone, everywhere, rural to urban, recognizing we all live on one land together, understanding we all depend on the same land for many things. I'll go on to the next slide, the opportunity. So, you know, we have to look at a new way of, we have to create a new vision of looking at the landscape and looking at the landscape differently. And part of this is integrating information from lots of different sectors. And so this is where a new vision for the landscape has emerged. Thanks, Matthew. But is it a feasible vision? How do we pay for it? As we learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being, native plants are friends and relations and allies, and we need to create more space for them to release the potential of the land. Native plants are the building blocks of healthy landscapes. Applying an economic lens, we see there is a growing demand for healthy landscapes from many sectors. When we connect the green dots, we uncover opportunities to address supply chain barriers, to invest in local knowledge and living seed banks, to activate gardeners and businesses that support them, to drive social enterprise, to accelerate thousands of actions in harmony with complex landscapes. With this shift in perspective, we are starting to talk about hope and growth, about an economy that grows life. And I'll just pause there for a second so you can digest that slide. Thanks, Matthew. Next slide, please. When we started this conversation, many leaders emerged interested in co-creating a new financial model. We decided to learn by doing. We're honored to work with DZCIB and other First Nations on this project. Through this journey, we have learned that reconciliation is essential to conservation, and we have much work to do. We were encouraged at every step, from the development of the concept by Daniel Fuentes to the guidance of our leadership team, initiated by Kelly Riley, TJ and Emma Young at DZCIB, Lena Bowden at Verge Capital, Brandon Dockstader of Oneida Nation of the Thames, Andre Bashis, Coral Waisaki, 3M, and others you will hear from today. Although launched the same day that the global pandemic was declared, the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond grows successfully. It is resilient. It is a resilient model with diversity embedded in its very nature. Already, it has proven to catalyze connections, collaborations, innovation, and opportunity for greater impact. It builds relationships to reconcile people and ecosystems. It is an amazing journey driven by the partners you see here and to whom we are immensely grateful to be aligned with, each with a different story of the bond. It's been a great pleasure to work with Dr. Deanne Arjalis, who will now share the financial story of the bond. Over to you, Deanne.
Bonjour à tous. Hello, this is Antler River. I'm an associate professor at the Ivey Business School, Western University here in London, Ontario. I am the research team lead of this project. So it's a community-based participatory research, which means that we've been working with all the partners, and we do that also for research purposes. I'll put again in the chat, again, you're gonna see the report we've designed as well as the story map, so you can go through the report as we're speaking as well. There were 5 research assistants who worked on the project for the past 2 years, Bonnie, Selena, Melanie, Michelina, and Valeria, and I want to give a big shout out to the students who've been helping this project. So I'm just gonna focus on this one slide to give you an overview of what the innovation side is from a finance perspective. On the left of the screen, you could see the traditional conservation finance models where governments and private and public philanthropists finance environmental projects. They don't make the achievement of their outcomes a key element of the financing structure. This has been great so far. The issue is that we like funding and we like efficient funding also, you know, because it takes time to get these grants, and we are in desperate need of more conservation finance projects. So we've designed this new conservation impact bond model on the right to address those both issues. So the goal of this bond is to leverage funding and to make the impact and the outcomes a key pillar of the funding structure, so we be sure that we achieve the outcomes we want to collectively achieve. So what you could see here, there are 2 goals. First, to reverse habitat loss and advance Indigenous reconciliation, and second, to empower the human-nature relationship with the Carolinian zone. So it looks like a social impact bond, but it's a bit different because it's a collective a collaborative approach to conservation finance, which means that the impact metrics have been designed with all the partners and will involve both Western conservation science and Indigenous traditional knowledge that you can see, and we're going to discuss that in a few minutes. It's collaborative. We have everybody on the table, and we all designed the project and the financial structure together. So this is a big difference. The second big difference from social impact bond as well is that we have to get the leverage with different types of funders, both public and private funders. So let's give me a brief overview of how it works. So on the right, you see the DZCIB conservation impact bond. So it offers a return to investors contingent on achieving quantifiable conservation outcomes. Those outcomes can be measurable, but it could be qualitative and quantitative outcomes. And we have traditional, again, Indigenous knowledge into those. Then the impact of the conservation project is assessed by a third party to determine success of the project based on the achievement of the outcomes. When this success is being achieved, then outcome payers, where the beneficiaries of the conservation outcomes, provide payment to the investors to cover the initial investment plus a return. So basically, we're gonna share the risk are the investors. Those are taking the risks that put the money up front. We do the conservation project. We agree on the outcomes and the metrics successes. When success is being achieved, then the outcome payers are paying the investors plus a return to compensate for the risk. Through that, we can leverage funding and we can be sure we're going to achieve the reasonable outcomes we wanted to go through. So this is in a nutshell. Now we're going to look a bit more about the investors as well as the impact metrics. More on the chat and the report as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deanne Law. We're now going to move to the section on collaboration. And as you can see from the slide that Michelle showed, there's an amazing assemblage of partners involved in this project. And that could introduce complexity. But one of the great aspects of the CIB model is by having the underlying sort of framework, it brings together such an interesting and diverse group of stakeholders who can all move in the same direction and bring all the strengths and complementarity to this complex problem. So we're going to hear now from two of the key stakeholders in the CIB model. We're going to hear from Brennan Vogel, representing the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, and James Chan, the manager of Verge Capital, the impact investor in the model. So I'm going to pass to Brennan.
Ani Buzu, hello and bonjour to everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us here today to learn about the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond. My name is Brennan Vogel. I'm the Climate Change Liaison in the Department of Treaties, Lands and Environment at Chippewa of the Thames First Nation. And I must confess, it is my colleague Emma Young, currently on maternity leave with her young son Carson, who has done the lion's share of the work on this project. But I am, of course, grateful to join you today from the traditional territories of Anishinaabe, DZCIB, Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, to share a little bit of perspective on this important and innovative example of collaboration, innovation for reconciliation and conservation work. So I'll start with this slide, and the founder of native-land.ca, one of Canada's emerging resources when it comes to thinking about Indigenous land sovereignty in the country. The founder of this website, Victor Temprano, has estimated that while it's important to recognize that all of Canada is in fact traditional territory of Indigenous people, it is estimated that around 35% or more of the country we call Canada is covered by modern treaty agreements and land claims. This is with Indigenous nations and diverse Indigenous nations that across the country. This is some 3.5 million square kilometers or more particularly significant in the north of Canada, where we have 1/5 of the Canadian landmass in the territory of Nunavut. Next slide, please. So it's really important, I think, and as has been demonstrated in this project, that we be talking about and thinking about and in fact practicing ethical space for collaborations between Indigenous nations and our settler colonial cultures when it comes to thinking about issues of reconciliation as well as biodiversity and climate change. So if we could take first the public sector goals of things like the United Nations Declaration's Rights on Indigenous People and the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action, both of which have been recently ratified nationally in our country as governing principles for relationships and improving relationships with Indigenous nations across the country. And then the global goals around climate change, net zero emissions by 2050, coming out of the Paris Agreement and the Framework Convention on Climate Change, as well as the EHE targets of for biodiversity protection across the world, in fact, and then here in our own country, 30% of the landmass protected by 2030. We can see how the actuation of these public sector goals really do require all hands on deck, as Leslie White-Eye said, and this includes the private sector in terms of the mobilization of capacity and incentives, and in particular finance for environmental projects that create impacts that create impacts through the creation of ethical spaces to protect, conserve, restore nature-based solutions for issues related to climate change and biodiversity, all happening with the spirit of truth and reconciliation. Next slide, please. So very simply, we can think about some of the key goals around, in particular, nature-based solutions coming about through common collaborations to sequester carbon and, in fact, methane, as we saw coming out of the Glasgow Agreement, a short-lived but very potent greenhouse gas. Sequestering carbon occurs through natural ecosystems, the peatlands, the wetlands, the forest lands, the blue carbon in aquatic ecosystems. It comes through restoring degraded ecosystems, particularly in heavily urbanized and agricultural regions like southwestern Ontario, to restore these ecosystems where they've been degraded and to protect and conserve them where they exist for the species at risk, and landscape approaches to resiliency that include habitat protection for non-human relations. And this is all really based in the tangible day-to-day work of managing land and practicing agriculture and forestry and urban development and growth in good ways that protects our environment against some of the very big challenges that we're faced with and short timelines that we're faced with as well, to protect and conserve biodiverse and carbon-rich ecosystems. Next slide, please. So very tangibly, I'll just read from the comprehensive plan here at DZCIB, which states that ethical stewardship of the land and the natural environment is based on an understanding that humans are a part of the natural world and not separate from it. Ultimately, it's the land that provides us with all that we need, and its bounty must be shared among all of us. And this means that we have a responsibility to manage lands and natural resources conscientiously to ensure that the way of life of current generations does not harm the capacity of the land to meet the needs of future generations, as we seek new and creative ways of thinking about land as a leader and a contributor to prosperity development. And so that's coming from the 10-year comprehensive community plan, which concludes next year here at Chippewa, and in the midst of developing next steps. This photo here shows the Band Council resolution protected lands as a part of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond here on Band territory at Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. This is a quarter of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond target for 2023 of protecting 1,000 acres throughout southwestern Ontario, I believe it is. This is about a quarter of that target. It's 267 acres of Carolinian forest, wet meadow, and wetlands, as well as potential for tall grass prairies to be conserved here at DZCIB. Next slide, please. And I know it's a little bit hard to make out here, but this is a map I pulled together that shows, with the dots here, confirmed sightings of significant species, including species at risk, such as the spiny softshell turtle, the hognose snake, birds such as prothonotary warblers and bobolinks, and a whole host of other species at risk that potentially could be out there at these Band Council reserved lands, or otherwise within the traditional territories and traditional lands of Deschamps-Zibing. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague James to speak further on the topic of collaboration. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Brennan, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Pleased to be here and share our perspective as the impact investors in this project. As you heard, I represent Verge Capital, which is a social finance program of Pillar Nonprofit Network based here in London, Ontario. And it was a kind of a community collaborative born from really the community organizations that you see on the screen there. What we do simply put in one sentence is that we invest in local communities and local economies across southwestern Ontario. And we do that specifically by making loans to social enterprises or social purpose organizations. That could include both small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs, as well as the businesses run by nonprofits and charities. And it also involves things, what we kind of call community infrastructure. So think affordable housing projects, green energy projects, community hubs, things of that nature. You can learn more about what we do and see the kind of the vast diversity of these organizations that we've invested in on our website, vergecapital.ca. But I'm here to kind of tell you why this conservation impact bond is by far the most kind of unique, most special, and if I can just borrow the terms, the themes from today's session, the most collaborative, most impactful, most innovative investments that we've done in our history. Depending on how familiar you are with impact investing, the point I want to make is that even for impact investors, so these are folks that are consciously, intentionally trying to achieve a social or an environmental return alongside a financial return. Even impact investors, you can still go about your work and go about your investments in a way that is not really equitable. You can still, extract a lot of value out of the communities you work in. You can still do work in a way that is really not a fair and just kind of a way of working. And it's unfortunately kind of a cliche, right? Whoever holds the purse strings tends to call the shots. The model here that you've heard from other speakers, and hopefully you'll get a better sense from the report, really turns out on its head. This is really a community-driven initiative, a community-driven project where the investor, for once, is not in the driver's seat. We are a minor, part in this, and I would suggest that we are the least important player and the least important partner in this. And then you just heard from Brennan, who's speaking from kind of the Indigenous and the First Nations point of view. We hopefully all recognize the importance of reconciliation. One of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action specifically talks about how the business community needs to do better in terms of working with Indigenous communities when it comes to things like economic development, investments, job creation, things like that. I would hope that everybody understands how important it is, but I can understand how nobody would really know how to do it. This project is a fantastic, tangible, concrete demonstration of how to do something like that and do it well. So that's one kind of unique aspect that I'm really proud of. The other aspect that's unique, if you look up kind of the textbook definition of impact investing, one part is about intentionality. The social impact that you're creating is not an accidental thing. It's not a byproduct. It really is an intentional act. But the other half of that definition talks about that it has to be measurable. And folks that are working in this space, whether you're in the social impact sector, or nonprofits, or social finance, you'll know that impact measurement is really hard. It's an art and a science. Nobody really has a nailed down. And as a result, and this applies to us as well, often it's not done at all, or if it's done, it's not done well. Here in this project, it's not only done well, it's integral, right? So you've heard from Professor Argelier talking about how the impact measurement piece not only is core to the whole structure and the design of the impact bond, but it's done in a way that combines both Western and scientific knowledge when it comes to conservation and biodiversity, as well as traditional Indigenous ways of knowledge and ways of being. That is really unique. And again, I would offer that as a really fantastic example of how to bring those different worldviews and bring those different ways of doing things together. And the last thing, and again, all the other speakers touched on this, is it's the collaborative aspect. Yes, somebody I think in the beginning mentioned that of course, when you add more players and you add more partners, it makes things more complicated. Typically, you can look at an investment having just two elements, right? The investor and the investee, and that's it. And to whatever extent there's collaboration involved, that typically just means there's a group of investors, right? And here you've got really a fantastic cross-sector, community-driven collaboration. This thing does not work and will not work without everybody doing their part and contributing what they're contributing. And again, to some, this might look like a really messy, really complicated, kind of thing. But as you can see again from our, the slide that you're seeing, we were born of this kind of collaboration. This is how and why Verge exists. To us, this is natural. To us, this is the right thing to do. We are not, put off, or we're not afraid of this kind of a partnership and this kind of collaboration. To us, this is what makes it special and what makes it unique. So, just a brief kind of highlight on our perspectives, why we're so excited and so proud to be part of this project. Again, as one minor player. Learn more, you read the report. There's been lots of blogs and other articles written about this. It really is a unique, really innovative model that we're hoping that other communities across Canada and indeed around the world can learn from and be inspired by. Thanks again. I'll pass it back to Matthew.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, James. I think that's a very nice segue into our sort of last component of the presentation, focusing on impact and the rather unique model that's been developed to evaluate impact with the bond. We have a group here that were involved both with the research and with the implementation to talk about the impact model and the actual impact on the ground. So we're going to have a sort of relay presentation from Michelina, Melanie, Daria, and Valeria. So I'm gonna pass with the baton to Michelina to start the process.
Thanks, Matthew. So one quick question we wanted to address in this section is, how do we determine success of the bond? And this is particularly important in the conservation impact bond model, where the return on investment is directly tied to outcomes. So in this part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about our collaborative approach to evaluating impact in the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond. The primary goal of our evaluation approach was to ensure that we are capturing the holistic impact that considers the social, environmental, economic, cultural, and relational significance of healthy ecosystems. This involved collaborating with community members of diverse industries, backgrounds, and worldviews to collectively determine 5 evaluation pillars that together aim to capture this holistic impact. So impact is measured using this evaluation framework, and impact is gathered from a variety of sources, including through the In the Zone Habitat Tracker and reports from individual habitat partners. So this approach to impact assessment acknowledges a breadth of ways to communicate impact, including through statistics, visual comparisons, stories, and ecological indicators to recognize the agency of nature. So I'm going to pass it over to Melanie, who will introduce each of the 5 evaluation pillars more in depth and share some example metrics that communicate the impact of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond to date.
Awesome, thank you, Michelina. I will, walk us through the goals of each evaluation pillar, as well as some of the impact metrics that have been collected up to date of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond Phase 1. So evaluation pillar number 1 is connecting healthy habitat. Its goals are largely ecologically focused and include the creation of climate adaptive landscapes, greenhouse gas sequestration, and biodiversity protection. To date, the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond has supported 170 acres of habitat improvements on a variety of habitat types, including wetlands, woodlands, prairie, and cultural lands. It has also resulted in upwards of 40,000 native plants being planted. Evaluation pillar number 2 is connecting knowledge across cultures and generations. Goals of this pillar include increasing ecoliteracy, supporting intergenerational knowledge transfers, sharing of knowledge across cultures, and bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples together in ethical space. To date, the bond has supported just over 1,100 people engaging in high-quality learnings about the land, connected 20+ partners and communities in projects, including 3 First Nations, and the project has been featured in 6 media articles and 2 conservation finance reports. Evaluation pillar number 3 is focused on connecting opportunities. This pillar's goals are to increase economic opportunities that align with improved social and ecological outcomes, such as supporting regenerative business, like in the native plant industry, and increasing cross-sectoral and intercultural economic opportunities. To date, the bond has supported 5 Indigenous-led projects and a total of 54 healthy landscape projects, as well as the creation of 2.5 acres of native seed orchards that support our native seed supply. Moving to evaluation pillar number 4, it is titled Connecting Our Hearts and Minds, and its goals include reconciling people and ecosystems, enhancing cultural health and well-being, and improving relations among people and between people and ecosystems. This pillar has been largely captured through individual reflections and testimonies, and I will share a quote of a testimony that really stood out from someone involved in the United Nation of the Thames Garden Project. Quote, "I had a lot of fun with our team this year. I was dealing with a lot of depression and anxiety. Working for the community really helped. It felt crazy when people would thank us for our hard work. I was just passing out seeds and gardening. I did not realize that it was more than that." End quote. And then pillar number 5 is connecting our bodies, which focuses on physically connecting people with their ecosystems, shifting lenses from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism, and increasing the quality of ecocentric sightings. To date, 825 native plant and wild garden kits have been handed out to support local food security and access to traditional medicines. And all partners have shared ecocentric sightings ranging from observations of beavers, deer, fox, loons, and a variety of other plant, animal, fungi, and insect identifications. So overall, this evaluation pillar framework has proven to be a very helpful tool in navigating and communicating this diverse and multi-dimensional project. And to dive deeper into what one of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond projects looks like on the ground, I will pass it to Dr. Daria Kaczynski, who is the Executive Director of Thames Talbot Land Trust.
Thanks very much, Melanie. I'm really excited to be here today to share with you some of the work that we participated in as part of the bond. So Thames Talbot Land Trust is a local nature conservation organization focused on protecting, restoring, and nurturing land. As a habitat partner, TTLT contributed 4 restoration projects as part of the pilot phase of the DZCIB. Today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about one of those projects. The Beebensee Tract is a 74-acre nature reserve that is mostly intact forest. But TTLT also acquired 2 acres of agricultural lands as part of the overall nature reserve. The goal was to restore those 2 acres to a thriving natural area. In the fall of 2019, TTLT partnered with the Restoration Ecology class at the University of Western Ontario to research and plan the most suitable restoration project for this site. Given historical records of savanna habitat at the site, the students proposed to restore this habitat to the landscape at the Beebensee Tract. Prairies and savannas were more widespread prior to European colonization, and this restoration project aimed to return a small patch of it to the landscape. Next slide, please. In 2019, 8 TTLT staff and volunteers, as well as 20 Western students, worked together to restore a plant, to source and plant native seeds at the site to create a savanna habitat. The species list for the planting included nearly 40 native species typically found at local prairie and savanna sites. The seed mix used seeds that are locally adapted, as well as seeds of the same species from further south that may be better adapted to the future expected climate. This mix will provide adaptive capacity for the restoration project in the face of accelerating climate change. Additional plantings and monitoring plots were established in 2020. Next slide, please. Within 1 year, many of the plants had germinated and some even flowered. But by year 2 of the project, seen here, You could see excellent establishment of native plants with more than 25 species confirmed on site. The project also helped connect people to nature. Western students completed before and after surveys using nature connectedness scale. After engaging in this project, the students' scores before and after surveys using questions like, their scores were higher for statements like, I take notice of wildlife wherever I am, and I feel very connected to all living things and to the earth. Students also reflected on how the project motivated and empowered them to take action to help heal our landscape. The Bibensi Tract Restoration Project was evaluated and contributed to all 5 evaluation pillars of the DZCIB. This restoration project at Bibensi Tract is one of the projects that are part of the larger portfolio of the DZCIB Conservation Impact Bond. To learn more details about each of the projects, our team has created a story map to complement the report. I will hand it over to Valeria to speak more about the story map.
Thank you, Daria. Now, I'm sure most of you are wondering, well, what is a story map? Well, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a story told through maps and images, and it's a much more visual and intimate way of sharing the relationships being facilitated by the bond, something that we felt was exactly what we needed to bring the report and habitat work to life. Because oftentimes it can seem like this black box where all we can say is we did X number of projects, there were X number of volunteers, we planted this many trees, removed this many invasive species, there were this many acres, total sites, final outcomes, and all of the information is undoubtedly there. But if you go to the next slide, please, with a story map, these words and lists can turn into something like this. And on the screen now is a section of the story map showcasing the work of some of our partners. And you can see how the visual and geographic nature of the story map would be more effective at telling the stories of the Carolinian zone and showcasing the lovely work that all of our habitat partners were doing. And it's a great supplement to the report because of how it can ground you to where the work was being done and showing you who we're trying to save. And the bond partners also came together from such diverse sectors, as you've probably seen, you know, from the public and private sector, nonprofits, academics, and First Nations communities. So in addition to the restoration work, the story map was able to bring voice to the people behind the bond and the journey of reconciliation that these bond partners underwent to come together to achieve this one common goal. So overall, Michelina, Melanie, Daria, and I wanted to give a glimpse into the impact evaluation behind the bond, the impact work on the ground, and the story of how they fit together. And so with that, I will pass it back to Matthew.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're now going to have a quickish conversation to really put what we've just heard in context. Obviously, we've covered a lot of ground. So I'm going to ask 2 of the speakers that you've already heard from, Deanne Law and Brennan, to join us. And I'd also like to introduce Sam. I just lost the screen, but Sam, if you could, I know you wanted to give a personal introduction, so please, Sam. There we go. Over to you, Sam.
Kingwana Lomwa, ni Shinzi Howe Shopako, ni Nonje Alapawi Lakawi, ni Nangwamok the Quad, ni Undulanapawi. So hello everyone. My name is Sam Whiteout. I come from Delaware Nation Moravian Town, or Alapawi Lakawi as it's known in the traditional name. We are Nahi along the DZCIB, Nahini downriver. From the location of, I guess, the Chippewa of the Thames. I also am the Indigenous Leadership Specialist with Carolinian Canada, and thank you so much for having me on this panel.
Wonderful, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful and incredibly interesting presentation journey so far. I want to start by getting a sense of how scalable and replicable the model we've just heard is. Deanne Law, I know that you've done a lot of research looking at the sphere of conservation finance as it's emerging. And sort of building on that knowledge, I wonder if you could give us some insights in how replicable and scalable is this type of model?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And there have been some questions in the question as well. So I've been trying to answer the participants' questions. So it's just a outlook here. Yeah, the goal is to make it replicable. That's the reason why we have this webinar and we have the report, and we made all the report and research under Creative Commons license, so we can it's a publicly shared knowledge, and that matters as well for replication. So it could be, you have to envision that as a bit of a Starbucks or a team like Starbucks. When you have a franchise and then you replicate the franchise. Coming from France, the coffee we have in Paris are not the same as the coffee we have here in London, Ontario at Starbucks, but still we have a bit of a model that we can develop and unfold. But this is kind of the idea. We developed this conservation impact bond model. We share everything in honesty in the report, so for you on the call to be able to replicate and learn from it. And then you have to apply a little to the collective and the structure of the ecosystems. What is key in the report and in the bond as well is the collective governance. So the way we design metrics and the way we collectively engage in the working of the project matters to the overall outcome. So completely replicable, but still localized and collective stakeholder involvement.
Excellent, wonderful. I'm going to now turn to you, Sam. Obviously, this model is a specific initiative that's trying to bring in Indigenous leadership. But I was wondering if you could reflect on what can we learn from this bond experience that might have sort of wider resonance for the very important agenda of reconciliation in Canada.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. I think that's a really great question. And I think when we look at how the CIB was created, we understand that it was done in safe and ethical space with Indigenous nations. This shouldn't be a new concept, but for the conservation sector, it is. And however, Indigenous people have always understood ethical spaces. These spaces are created all the time and come together organically. And in Western Western societies, we are just starting to push to see this change, especially when we talk about truth and reconciliation. We can't talk about restoration in this territory without Indigenous folks. And the Carolinian Canada recognizes that we live in traditional territories first and a province second, but both coexist. I think that when you look at the DZCIB, these understandings were reflected throughout the process and moved into action with Indigenous people as complete and equal partners. And lastly, the result, as an example, is that Chippewa of the Thames, has a minimum of 217 acres that is protected by the CIB. We always say in community, if you heal the land, you heal the people, and that is the very practice of truth and reconciliation.
Sorry, I was just muted then. Brendan, I just sort of building on that, one of the models of conservation that's emerged in Canada recently is this idea of Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And I'm wondering if, building on what Sam has said, if there's sort of linkages with this model for that sort of new model of Indigenous-led conservation.
Unmute, right? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And just to build on Sam and Deanne's responses there, Indigenous protected and conserved areas is extremely important, particularly when we think about biodiversity protection, because globally we understand about 80% of biodiversity is being stewarded by Indigenous people around the world. And I think we could probably think similarly about that in Canada, and certainly within the Carolinian zone, as Michelle presented, there's significant work to be done around protecting those habitats. In terms of the bond itself, there is no template for IPCA development. This is a new area that's being developed by doing. There's some very exciting developments across the country happening right now, building on some really great examples of, say, the Great Bear Rainforest Project in British Columbia, which is connecting carbon offset and credit work to Indigenous guardians and habitat protection out there. There's other examples of tribal parks and Indigenous land claims and co-management arrangements in the north. But certainly multi-stakeholder approaches that bring together co-development processes that are based on that idea of ethical space, as Sam mentioned, that develop new ideas around collaboration and creating and leveraging public sector goals and private sector partnerships for land conservation, protection and restoration with widespread co-benefits on treaty lands and in traditional territories. These are ripe areas for development and certainly ones that don't come a moment too soon. Thanks.
Wonderful, thanks Brennan. Dian Law, you recently did some work where you looked at the responsible investment industry in Canada. So this is the mainstream sort of major banks and financial institutions that are trying to be responsible in their investment practices. And you found some gaps in particularly in terms of how those systems and frameworks are integrating Indigenous peoples. I'm wondering if there's any lessons from the bond for wider sort of capital markets on how they can engage with this agenda.
Yeah, sure. So first, I think we need Indigenous communities being involved in the capital markets and both the valuation and the allocation of capital. And this is super important. And we're not going to have a transition towards a green economy, and we're not going to have economic reconciliation if it's not the case. That's the first outcome. The second outcome is that we both need to learn, and I say we because I'm more on the finance side, I will say, being coming from business school. So we need to learn both from each other how to design those type of product and how to include Indigenous leadership in the design of financial product. So I think it's a first step towards this Indigenous-led financial product, and this is gonna keep growing.
Wonderful, excellent. Brendan, in your presentation, you mentioned the opportunity of the bond as a model for deploying nature-based solutions, and I'm interested in your thoughts on how this model can be a tool for delivering on local and national climate commitments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to underscore the importance of creating ethical space for conservation and reconciliation conversations to be happening. It does bring together a diverse group of stakeholders and shareholders around common goals to support a healthy environment, climate resilient landscapes, biodiverse landscapes, as well as the work and the practice of reconciliation. Creating opportunities and incentives for the development of conserved areas is integral to meeting the HE targets for 2030, 30%. By 2030, as I shared, we already understand that over 35% of Canada is treaty or traditional territory, so it's going to be impossible to meet that goal for 2030, which is only 8 short years away without some substantial contributions and collaborations with Indigenous people. So there are many developments here to focus on those co-benefits of landscape and habitat conservation and protection, restoration. You know, these ideas around carbon sequestration and storage in existing landscapes and restored landscapes, all of which is important to the resiliency issues associated with climate and biodiversity, and as well as the path of reconciliation with Indigenous people in Canada.
Wonderful, thanks Brennan. Sam, maybe to finish this section, so Carolinian Canada has led the development of the bond as the sort of lead facilitator. I'm just wondering, why not just rest on your success? Why is Carolinian Canada and then in partnership with the leadership team investing really in scaling this up, both within the Carolinian zone and more broadly?
Thank you. I think when we look at climate change and adaptation, we understand that healthy landscapes are key to tackling those issues. The DZCIB builds capacity not only for healthy landscapes, but it engages so many people, partners, and contributors who all support the model. I think if we can scale up and build on this pilot model, other places, the benefits long-term support our best chances at building resilient landscapes and communities. We know we don't have time to wait anymore, and the CIB is one way that we can do this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you to all our panelists. That was a really sort of useful and insightful way of interpreting what we heard in the first part of today's session. So thank you very much. We're now going to, we have our announcement, and I realize we've just gone over time, so I'm just going to ask if you can bear with us for a couple of minutes. I would like to invite Tanya Pulfer from Environment and Climate Change Canada to come online. There we go. Hi, Tanya. So one of the exciting things about today, in addition to the publication of the report, is an announcement of federal government support for the next phase of the project. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Thank you for having me today. We're really excited at Environment Canada about this initiative. I want to first of all thank all the speakers. I really learned a lot as well. And this is a really exciting, innovative initiative. And I love how it joins the conservation work, like those doing the work at Chippewas of the Thames and Thames Talbot Land Trust with investors. The Conservation Impact Bond addresses many of the needs that the Government of Canada recognizes as necessary going forward for Canadians, and that includes collaboration and the need to increase nature-based climate solutions, and especially the international biodiversity targets. But we need to do that in a good way by ensuring ethical space and ensuring that we see both the Western and try to learn and understand the Indigenous ways of knowing for us settlers. On behalf of Environment and Climate Change Canada, we look forward to continuing to work together on these advances by contributing to phase 2 of the project over the next 2 years to expand this to the Long Point Walsingham Forest Priority Place, which is just to the east of the DZCIB area. So congratulations on a great success of phase 1, and we look forward to working with you on phase 2.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tanya. So thank you for bearing with us. I know we've run a little bit over time, and we've covered a lot of ground very, very quickly. But it's such a diverse and rich partnership. It's just wonderful to be able to hear from all these stakeholders, all these different perspectives and capabilities, but all coming together for a common goal in a very innovative model. So once again, I just want to flag that the report is available, and we will be sending to everyone registered a link to the report. We'll also be sending a link to the StoryMap, which I really recommend that you engage with. It's a fabulous tool. And we'll also provide some additional contact information for those of you that want to learn more. I know that we received a number of questions, and I think what we're going to try and do is maybe compile them into a sort of Q&A document that I think we'll be able to sort of share afterwards, so that we can at least answer your questions, if not today, in the very near future. So I want to thank everyone again, all the presenters, all the organisations involved. Recognize again Carolina in Canada as our co-hosts, and to also thank the institutions that were involved in investing in the bond in phase 1. We heard from James from Verge, 3M were an important contributor, and now the federal government through phase 2. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.